Welcome to the Richard Nixon Presidential Library. I'm Jonathan Mavroidis of the Richard Nixon Foundation. Thank you all for being here tonight. We hope you had a chance today or in the near future to go through our newly renovated galleries. They're pretty spectacular. The subject of tonight's discussion is artificial intelligence, or AI. AI is defined in Merriam-Webster's dictionary as the capability of a machine to imitate human behavior. It dates back more than half a century when, a noteworthy time in 1961, the first industrial robot, Ultimate, started working for General Motors and replacing humans on the assembly line. We see the revolution revived when IBM's Deep Blue beat world chess champion Garry Kasparov. Today's global technology companies innovating in AI in the areas of aerospace, warfare, and even consumer technology. We live with it every day when we log on to Google, ask Siri, or give Alexa our commands. In December, Wired magazine listed some of the crazy things that happened in AI in 2017. They included the robot Sophia, who can imitate facial expressions and emotions when she was granted citizenship in Saudi Arabia. AI learned how to fly drones and solve the quantum of many particles at once. In China, a robot named Xiaoxi passed its national medical license examination, and computer scientists from Google have studied how AI behaves in social situations by using principles of game theory, and social sciences have found that it's possible for AI to act out in an aggressive manner. I don't know if we're living in the world of Terminator 3, the rise of the machines, but AI will continue to rise in the world we live in. This is especially true for future generations in their daily lives, their education, their careers, and the society they live in. Tonight's Collegiate Forum is the fourth such program hosted by the Foundation and U.S. Vigilance, aimed at timely competition of ideas concerning pressing issues which face the college-age generation. The discussion among youth is especially pertinent to the legacy of the 37th president. When he signed the 26th Amendment, which lowered the age of America's right to vote, he said, "You will infuse into this country some idealism, some courage, some stamina, some high moral purpose that this nation always needs, because a country throughout history, we find, goes through ebbs and flows of idealism. Time after time, the country needs an infusion of new spirit, an infusion of youth. You are bringing that." Moderating our ideas discussion tonight is the partner for this event, Robert Zwirling. Robert Zwirling has 25 years of experience as a technology executive and author. He has founded and built several high-growth software companies about business performance improvement in manufacturing, telecommunications, data high availability, predictive analytics, and artificial intelligence. He is currently founder and managing director of Aurora Predictions, a company that develops AI for predictive insights to enable companies improve execution, cut costs, and increase revenue. He's the author of a dozen papers on predictive analytics and is patent pending on artificial intelligence software. A focus of his writing concerns AI and its applications, ethics, and public policy. He is co-founder with his daughter Megan of U.S. Vigilance, who helped put together this event tonight, an organization dedicated to encouraging fact-based and reasoned dialogue on public policy that enhances responsible citizenship and promotes liberty. Robert, thank you very much. The stage is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Welcome. This is a great place, isn't it? What a nice room. Hey, by the way, how much does this rent out for a night? Can we? Okay, good. Just some brief opening remarks, and then we're going to get to our panelists and panel discussion. Artificial intelligence, or AI, dates back over 75 years. Alan Turing, a mathematician, explored the mathematical possibility of artificial intelligence, suggesting that, quote, humans use available information as well as reason in order to solve problems and make decisions. I guess he didn't talk to my wife about that. But anyway, and if this premise is true, then machines can learn to do this too. This was his basis of his paper in 1950 called Computing Machinery and Intelligence, which he discussed, quote, how to build intelligent machines and how to test their intelligence. So what is artificial intelligence? I think Jonathan gave us a brief on that. But very, very broadly speaking, it's the ability of a machine to make decisions that are done by humans. The most prevalent kind of AI would be the manufacturing floor of robots. Or I'm sure you all have iPhones out there. You have your Siri. And of course, today we talk about what? Driverless cars. However, little attention is given to the white-collar workforce. After all, these are the college-educated folks whose thinking we can't imitate with a robot. However, this is not so. Lawyers who do patent searches, doctors who are radiologists, accountants, even judges can be replaced with artificial intelligence. In fact, any rule-based process today is the first wave for white-collar AI applications. Now, my company, Aurora Predictions, develops AI software to predict trends, forecast outcomes of sales and consumer demand that are difficult for humans to do. A salesman sees every deal will close, but AI can cull through many different types and volumes of data to assemble a profile of deals that have a propensity to close and those that do not. And if we're successful at Aurora with our software, we can eliminate up to 75% of the manual-based spreadsheet work to free humans to higher level functions of data analysis that will drive better business performance. So the initial reaction, I'm sure you're thinking about AI, is that it will reduce headcount. Well, think for the moment, bank tellers and the ATM. Today, there are actually more bank tellers than there were when the ATM was first introduced. That's because there are more branches. Even though there are fewer tellers per branch, there are actually more branches. So today's AI, and you heard some of the theories that, examples that Jonathan had, are remarkable, but they're still relatively simple. IBM's Deep Blue supercomputer is the world chess champion, but it doesn't look in the sky and say, wow, what's up there? You can't wonder at its beauty. You can't make discoveries serendipitously. Humans have a combination of intellect and emotion. We empathize, we reason, we have a sense of being, we fear death. All of these things computers cannot do. In fact, the simple act of visual recognition is highly advanced for an AI computer. And we've just had that happen, a tragic death of a pedestrian in Arizona by a driverless car. Now let's imagine this. Let's take that car, and it's confronted with the following situation. A child chases his ball into the street. What does the car do? One, does it avoid hitting the child by swerving off the road and injuring the passenger in the car? Or two, does it avoid hitting the child and avoid hurting the passenger in the car by causing a vehicle in the opposite direction to run into an oncoming truck behind it? What is the choice? By what parameters is the choice made? And who decides what the parameters are that go into the choice? You see, humans, we react to a situation. However, an AI car is expected to analyze the conditions and calculate an outcome. Therefore, morality is reduced to an equation that has to be solved. And over time, AI systems will get more and more complex, and with complexity, we'll lose control. Sentient systems and morality will collide. Even if we can embed deep within the program of AI a command never to harm a human, will a sentient android override his programming when confronted with self-preservation? So how will society handle these disruptive technologies? Will people lose self-respect from lack of labor, or demand a universal basic wage simply for doing nothing? Will government devolve into those who rule and those who are ruled? or will we elevate as enlightened humans and no longer need government? With that, let me welcome you to the Collegiate Forum and our topic tonight. So let me introduce everyone. You guys changed, didn't you? No, there you are. You're on the right spot. All right, John, batting first position. He is a freshman at Claremont Mechanic College, John Church, studying philosophy and computer science. This summer, he will be contributing to a machine learning project that aims to analyze and predict fluctuations in the price of small cap stocks. We're all seeing him after the forum here. Thank you. Next up is William Gu from Pomona College, sophomore, studying economics and psychology. He is also current editor-in-chief of the Claremont College's most read student journal, the Claremont Independent. He is currently studying the differences between technology as a complement in production versus a substitute for labor. And batting third from Pomona College, our sophomore, Matthew Ludlam, studying neuroscience. Doc, I got this pain right over here. I'm sure you can help me. This summer, he will be contributing to a machine learning project that aims to analyze and predict. Oh, no, that's you. Wrong one, sorry. He's neuroscience, sorry, Matthew. Sophomore at Pomona College studying neuroscience. He has an extensive experience in working with robotics and is currently on a team doing nanorobotics. Very impressive. Thank you, gentlemen. All right. Ready to go? All right. This isn't that painful. Okay, good. Okay, our first question. A University of Oxford study from 2013 estimated that 47% of U.S. jobs may be at risk within the next 2 decades because of advances in artificial intelligence and automation. Last year, the White House Council of Economic Advisors estimated that workers making below $20 an hour would have an 83% chance of losing their jobs in that span of time. So, gentlemen, your question. Are you tailoring your college education and career development to adapt to the rise of artificial intelligence? Do you even see this as an issue that will affect you? And we're going to start at the very back.
All right. It's working. I am certainly tailoring my education to the rise of artificial intelligence. As Mr. Swerling mentioned, am going into philosophy and computer science. I'm actually hoping to work in machine learning after college. I think that it's incredibly exciting that just a few hours north of here is the hub of advancement in artificial intelligence, which is, in my opinion, the greatest frontier of our generation. In my dad's generation, the dream was to become an astronaut and explore space, and now probably the most mysterious thing to us, and in the near future, is going to be exploring the uses of artificial intelligence.
William?
Well, I guess as someone who's not majoring in computer science, it's hard to really tailor my education towards working with artificial intelligence. But I think artificial intelligence would eventually be a complement to labor, because there was this game actually after Deep Blue beat World Chess Champions, where amateur chess players with laptops that were equipped with rudimentary AI actually beat Deep Blue, because a human combining with a machine is always going to be better than a machine itself. So I think getting a broad education is really important. Just for me at a liberal arts college, getting a broad education will really help me think outside the box in ways that AIs can, so I could complement an AI in production. And I do think that at some colleges, mine included, there's less of an emphasis, if you're not a computer science major, of like getting introduced to machine learning. So, but we have online courses like from Coursera. You could take a machine learning course from Stanford for about $50, $60, and I hope to enroll in that when I have more time.
So I'm of a similar position as Will. I just add something onto that. This question first started talking off about the Oxford study. The Oxford study didn't just talk about a raw number of jobs that would be endangered. It also rated jobs as a general field as their percentage likelihood of being overtaken by machines in these coming decades. Now, I think for me personally, I'm right now looking into neuroscience, looking to go into medicine, and specifically surgery. And that job under the Oxford standard was about a 0.2% chance that it would be overtaken. Now, that seems a little contradictory because you feel like it would make sense that a surgeon should be able to be robotic as long as it understands all of the human body, as long as it knows how the parts and pieces interact. It should be able to do all the tasks. But due to the pure interactiveness of surgery, robots don't necessarily have that capability. There's Da Vinci devices, which are beautiful millions and millions of dollars robotic devices that help the surgeon do his task, but they don't really take over the task for the surgeon. So just whatever we're looking at, we always need to not base it off of our initial intuition of the subject, but actually look into it. Is this position potentially something that can be taken over by AI in the near future, or is it safer than we may initially think?
So do any of you think that, or I should say what I'm hearing is that you all don't think that your jobs are at risk, but do you look at any of your classmates and say, oh gosh, you're in the wrong line of study? Where do you guys think that AI is going to affect one of your classmates, and in what areas? Let's start with the other way down. Matthew, why don't you go first?
So my older brother is currently taking accounting courses at CMC, and he's also friends with a lot of accounting majors. But the problem is because it's a very rule-based system, it's pretty susceptible to automation. If you're able to follow a set of laws, a set of systems, I mean, even for taxation, TurboTax can do the job that a very high-priced tax attorney can handle. Those kinds of positions that are regulated by laws, people can still do better with the complement of machines, but in the next 20 years, it is quite likely to assume that these jobs will be outsourced to more artificial intelligence.
Now, William, you have a different view of that, don't you?
Okay, so I think in accounting, obviously, what TurboTax is doing is great. It's amazing, but I think not all businesses just want to follow the rules. That's why you hire tax attorneys. What if you want to save a little bit more on your tax returns? I don't think an AI is going to be able to bend the rules or even like break them, calculating a risk of getting audited. I think a human CPA or a tax attorney is going to use an AI, work with an AI to see what is your risk of being audited if you break those rules, if your client absolutely wants to break those rules. I think that is why you're always going to have humans working with AIs.
So we need humans for criminal endeavors then, is that it? Trying to narrow this down.
Yeah, I guess Hobbes will agree.
Okay. John, where do you come down on this? Which one of your criminal colleagues do you think is going to be affected?
Maybe I'm a little bit optimistic, but I think that people will be perfectly happy with a legal AI doing their taxes. But yeah, I do think that there's going to be, especially in quantitative fields, as has been mentioned, there's a huge risk of the field being taken over entirely. Now, that being said, as AI is right now, it's getting a lot better at doing tasks like accounting or like identifying certain images. But these are sort of very narrow tasks. It still needs oversight. So in the foreseeable future, I do think there's going to be a place for people with expertise in those fields, even if their main occupation is taken over by AI. But in the long term, I don't think that we're going to need much human assistance in purely quantitative tasks.
So let me start with William. Are there any things that you or you think any student going to college today needs to consider when you're in college about artificial intelligence? Like, do you look forward and say, these things could happen and therefore I will tailor my education by X, Y, or Z?
Two things. First of all, I think as a general rule, even if AI gets better than humans at every single thing on an absolute scale, humans will still be better and have some comparative advantages. So in economics, basically, if you have a comparative advantage in something, it doesn't mean you have an absolute advantage in that area. Let's say a machine's better at both drinking water and doing calculations, but so much better at doing calculations than drinking water. I know it's a stupid task. I just saw a water bottle. So much better at doing calculations and drinking water than a human is, then a human will have that comparative advantage at drinking water. So I think as college students, we really need to start researching which areas will humans have a comparative advantage in. So for me, at first I was going to be a straight econ major, and then I decided, well, in high school I like psychology, so might as well incorporate some of that, and some human irrationality would be a little bit harder, at least for the time being, for an AI to predict.
John?
So I need to disagree because I think there are many tasks such as accounting, or we were actually talking about this a bit earlier, imaging for cancer screenings, that AI actually is already exceeding human capabilities. And I think then those tasks, you mentioned creativity, there are some tasks like that that just don't require a lot of human ingenuity for the average task.
But John, if I can interrupt, do you see that, though, as something, when you think about it, do you say, I need to change something in my college experience? I need to do something when I go to college to account for that? Or it doesn't even come into your mind, does it or doesn't it?
Well, since I'm in computer science, it's definitely come into my mind, but the way
like,
I see it...
Did you start in computer science?
I did not, actually. I started in international relations, but I switched to computer science because I realized how much I liked it and the opportunities presented in that field. And I think by the time AI takes over computer science, well, my field has advanced far enough to unemploy itself, which I think is the goal.
Okay. Employment, good. Matthew, did AI have some effect on you and your thinking?
So it definitely did. I've been in robotics since I was in the 8th grade, just doing FRC, which is First Robotics League for high school students. It's been a passion of mine for a while, but I always wanted to do medicine instead of engineering or a hyper-robotic-centered position. And I feel like my advice that I gave myself over time and that I've given to my peers is just don't leave yourself in a position where you're susceptible to massive change ruining your life. Don't go for a position where you feel like as if a robot, just a tiny change happens in the way we understand AI, and there's this large revolution that your job would be in jeopardy. Make sure your value goes beyond, even if machines could infringe on your work, that you still have some degree of value that makes you different and more valuable than the machine that might try to replace you. Just don't get caught unexpected, and it'll be okay.
Very good. Let's go on to another question. Some in Silicon Valley purport for a universal basic income, espousing that all people, regardless of income, receive a monthly grant to, quote, live better and fuller lives, unquote. Further, they espouse that UBI will make people more creative and inspire them to entrepreneurship. UBI is positioned as an investment, but is this just another cause of income redistribution? As UBI requires that the rich, those making more than $1.5 million per year, get a small wealth, as they say, small wealth tax of 1.5%, because research, they say, shows when providing people moderate amounts of cash, they work just as well as they did before. So your question, should artificial intelligence be regulated to protect the job market? And should there be a UBI? Matthew, let's start with you.
So I'm of a mixed opinion. First off, starting with the part about UBI, I think this is a type of welfare system that's redistributing wealth. And let me clarify this at the beginning. UBI is based off of a Swedish model, the idea that if people have more opportunity, if they have more available wealth, they'll be able to risk a little bit more, and they'll be able to make more societal benefit overall. And that's a good idea initially, but when translated to American economics and political philosophy, it doesn't have quite the same transitive effect. So I'm always skeptical, at least in theory, when these kinds of ideologies are said they're going to be overreaching, they're going to be overall beneficial, when they're based on models that don't show global prosperity. That being said, to move on to the second part of the question, you're also talking about, correct me if I'm wrong, you're talking about wealth redistribution, but you're also talking about, what was the?
Well, should artificial intelligence be regulated to protect jobs? Are there some markets that, or there's some transitory period where you need the government to step in and to regulate or protect? Like, for example, early on in President Obama's term, he stepped in and said, we've got to protect the automotive manufacturing market, and we're going to do some unnatural acts to make sure that those workers don't lose their job. Your thoughts?
Of course. So while this seems on the surface extremely beneficial for the people to try to protect their jobs, if it is inherently slowing down the progress, this is going to lead to harm overall. Now, this might sound contradictory at first, but if we're talking about a transition period between when people are not operating with AI on a day-to-day basis to where people are operating with AI on a day-to-day basis, we want to make that transition period as short as possible. For a lot of people who have jobs that would be taken over by AI, we'd rather they don't be looking for a job for 15, 20 years. Maybe it's a 5-year period. That's a lot better than having people out of work or essentially not providing any societal benefit for up to 20 years. So I think things that would slow down the rate of progress when we're on this AI revolution should be looked at with a very careful light. I'm not saying don't protect people, because there should be some protections for people to make sure that that everybody doesn't go jobless overnight. But that's not to say that we should make massive reform to try to hold back the AI industry from revolutionizing and in its way creating more jobs potentially than existed before.
William, you're up.
I think I'll start with UBI first. So first of all, in Sweden, obviously they have a lot of innovation. Volvo's stagnating, even for your population size. They aren't creating that much innovations aside from IKEA. And so basically, when you have UBI, you have the power, instead of having a bell curve in people's incomes and abilities, you actually have a negative exponential function. You have a negative power function where you have a small group of people who are very, very bright, taking advantage of AI and becoming entrepreneurs. And the rest of the people, well, probably won't be able to take advantage of AI because they already have an income. They don't want to work. They don't want to take advantage of AI and start their own company. So theoretically, if AI gets advanced enough, you could be the CEO and you won't need a CFO, you won't need a COO. You could just have your own company. The AI will take care of the rest. You'll be able to create your own product. And as we see from, in psychology, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, when you have food, you want friendship. When you have friendship, you want something higher up, less carnal. People don't always act on that. Whenever they have, even if they have food, they want better food. So I just think UBI will just make people lazy. How do you make sure that UBI won't make people play video games all day, or even worse, do drugs all day? And as for regulation, I think once you regulate AI, in a free market, AIs will do what it has a comparative advantage in, and humans will do what humans have a comparative advantage in. Once you regulate AI, you will ruin that whole perfect system. Well, it's not perfect, but it's close to perfect system. You will have AI intruding into areas where humans have a comparative advantage when a government says suddenly, oh, we want to fund this area of AI, even though that area of AI is something that AI doesn't have a comparative advantage in. It will actually even lead to even more job loss, I think, if you regulate the system.
So John, it sounds like your colleagues here are not big advocates of UBI. How do you come out on this?
Yeah, so I'm actually a big advocate of UBI, but first I'll go to the thing I agree on just very shortly. I do agree that we need to leave regulation to the software industry itself, which is already attempting to self-regulate, instead of trying to move regulation over to the government, which has less experts in the industry. But as for UBI, I think that there are 3 big reasons that I think will address the concerns of both Matthew and Will. The first, concerning especially Will's problem with UBI making people possibly lazy, is that if we use UBI instead of universal basic income instead of the current welfare system, then we eliminate welfare cliffs. That's one of the big problems a lot of people have with current welfare system, is that once you start working, you can actually start losing money because you lose benefits. But with a universal basic income, you get a check. Once you start working, that's just added on. And so it gives incentive to start working instead of just relying on UBI. From an ethical standpoint, I think that a lot of people might disagree that we should give welfare to people who are able to work but who don't want to. However, few people would say that we shouldn't help people who aren't able to work, say someone who's disabled. Many people would agree that that person should have some form of welfare. Well, in a post-artificial intelligence society, when many people are put out of work and simply can't find work, for example, if you were an accountant and your job is taken over by artificial intelligence, then there is an ethical concern with having all of these people who simply can't find work for a period of time without any income. And then the third point I'd like to make is just that in a society where a large portion is unemployed, just economically, it makes sense to give them a base income. It's a stimulus to the economy. If 30% of the economy is unemployed and having no welfare, then that means that 30% of the economy isn't able to contribute to the economy and vote with their dollar.
So my apology to the accountants in the audience. I know we're picking on accountants tonight. It's nearing April 15th. Don't worry, after that we'll switch to lawyers. John, I'm sure you have a comment to that. I mean, excuse me, Matthew, I know you had a comment to John.
I think I'm not in entire disagreement with John what you're talking about. But
No, please be in disagreement. We're looking for that.
Oh, disagreement's going to happen.
Okay, yeah,
it's just not going to be complete. I think your end game that he's talking about is saying in more of a utopian society when a substantial, like absolutely massive portion of the population is out of work. And in that kind of circumstance, I can understand what you're talking about with UBI. As it scales, it doesn't disadvantage you from actually going for a job. All these advantages that come from UBI in that kind of a circumstance. But we're talking about a circumstance where we're scaling up AI in this interim period. I don't think UBI has a necessity right now in the current system. In the status quo, I think even though the welfare system can be seen as sometimes as government intervention, I think it still serves a very important purpose. In the status quo, I'm not saying get rid of welfare, I'm just saying to make a move to UBI right now before we have the AI development to really match what UBI is trying to do is a little bit too much of hubris in my opinion.
So, one more comment on this, William. When you think about UBI, and it's a little akin to it, the concept of the minimum wage, it seems as the minimum wage goes up, more people look and want to do automation to replace humans. So is the minimum wage kind of part of this discussion, or is it irrelevant and the focus should be on, let's go with a universal basic income, give everything to, give something to everyone, and we'll all be more inventive if we do that?
Well, I think minimum wage is slightly different from UBI. So basic background, if you have minimum wage, then that's above the equilibrium market wage, then the companies are going to have to want to lay off people, and that's just introductory economics. So I think with the UBI, what happens is that you will get less innovation. And according to some economic growth models, the main thing that drives higher living standards is technical progress. It's innovation from human minds. And I think with UBI, a lot of people are just going to be disincentivized from actually contributing to innovation. Again, you'll see that negative power function where you have a very small amount of people who are just intrinsically, innately motivated to really contribute and innovate, but most people are just going to be disincentivized. You see the Gulf states, the oil-producing Gulf states. They don't have exactly like UBI, but they have so much government subsidies. Like you could buy like a Mercedes-Benz for like $20,000 or something like that. I don't know exact numbers. They subsidize everything. So, and they don't have that much innovation because the people, like if I have an income of 20,000 US dollars, I remember in my environmental science class in high school, actually, we were looking at possessions of different families across the world and their incomes. There's this Kuwaiti family income of $20,000 US dollars, 5 Mercedes-Benz in their garages. When you have that much subsidies, which is akin to universal basic income, I just don't think you have an incentive to innovate anymore. And you see very little innovation from those countries.
John, you're looking like you want to weigh in again.
Yeah, I would like to respond because I think that universal basic income just because of how it sounds, is often equated to the beginning of some sort of like socialist system and increasing the welfare state, when in fact I and many proponents of it look at it as exactly the opposite. Universal basic income aims to remove a lot of the government inefficiency with welfare as it is, remove the welfare cliffs, and actually increase the incentive for innovation. Because with a basic income, if you're content with the basic income, then okay, like there's not much that you could do for them anyways. However, if you're not, once you start working and maybe you have an idea and start innovating, then the extra money you made is added onto the universal basic income. So in that way, it actually incentivizes people to be more creative and innovate.
We're going to move on to the next question, but I think all your points are very good. While we're on this idea of UBI, and let's go into the next thought about ethics. What ethical challenges, in your view, does the rise of artificial intelligence bring to the labor market? And Matthew, we're going to start with you.
I think the main ethical concerns that can arise is what happens to people in this new age, in this new era. What's the role of humans going forward? If robots can do a lot of what people do but better, then what do people do? Neuroscience studies and psychology studies have found that people that are deprived of sensory input or deprived of what they might refer to as meaningful work can often see neurological deterioration in a matter of about 12 hours, and that's with complete sensory deprivation. People need to be useful. We need to do things. If we're not doing things, it's very harmful for our neurology. So when we're moving on from here, I know a neuroscience major having difficulty pronouncing the word, but as we're moving on from here, we have a little under 100 billion neurons in our brain. About 70 billion of those are in the cerebellum. So what do we do moving forward to make sure that our brains are going to be properly satiated after a large change? After these monstrous changes to how we work, how we live, how we interact in communities, what is going to be the large consequence here? And I think to some degree, when we're talking about protecting people and talking about protections moving forward for this interim period or even afterwards, when there's stronger AI, I think we really need to look at what's healthiest for people as human beings so that we can protect their best interests, because that's kind of what AI is supposed to be doing in the first place, making our lives easier. And if it's not doing that, it's not doing its basic function of artificial intelligence.
So let me pass this on now to William. By the way, thank you for that number, 100 billion neurons, what was it?
A little less.
Wow, I think I put a dent in those with my drinking. Good that I have some reserve. But William, we take this, and is the ethics then of AI to make our life better? And if it's going to make our life better, what does better look like?
Okay, well, let's say that AI starts being a complement of human labor and starts being a substitute. I think a lot of you guys have read the Jane Austen novels, where a lot of the main characters, they have those estates, they don't need work, they can live off their estates and do the things they like. I think if AI actually produces enough output in the economy that people could all live like our Jane Austen characters, then people can derive stimulation from doing things they like music, reading, poetry, art. I think humans will go into those areas, and it's natural economically, because in those areas humans will almost forever have a comparative advantage.
Yeah, so one thing that I've been thinking about a little bit is something that Nietzsche wrote a lot about, which was that under an aristocratic system, the aristocrats have this sort of weird, this weird opportunity to only sit around and think. That's why a lot of the greatest works that we've read in high school and stuff, like Tocqueville, are written by old French people who had a bunch of people working for them. Now, obviously, aristocracy is not the best form of government. I'm not advocating for that. I quite like democracy. However, under a new society where AI has taken up a lot of the need to work, there would again be this opportunity for people who don't want to work to sort of do what they want and be creative. Now that's the optimistic view. There's also the view that maybe if people don't need to work, then they're not going to sit around writing novels in French. They're going to just do absolutely nothing useful and become depressed because they have nothing to do. I hope that we end up with the first option, but I guess we can't really know.
Matthew, you want to weigh in?
I do want to weigh in on this one because I think there's two political doctrines that have a lot of weight here. First off is meritocracy, and secondly is this kind of Marxist idea here. So the second part of what he's talking about, that's more along a optimal Marxist view. What a lot of people remember about Marx is socialism and anti-capitalism. What they don't remember is the part he said about leisure, that it's optimal for people to actually have some leisure time when you come home from work, that you have time to spend time with your family, play video games, relax, take a nap. You should have the time to do all of those things. And Marx was one of the people who really presented this idea for modern society. Building off of that, though, there's also the other part, which is the meritocracy side of this. What AI really does is it breaks down the borders between humans, and your race doesn't really matter, your gender doesn't matter, any other discriminatory things about you don't really matter. It's can you complete the task you are given? That's what matters, and that is the meritocracy part of it. That is, in some ways, very beneficial for people because no longer do you have oppressive societies that are literally stopping you outside of your control from being able to do the most that you can. It's also harmful because if you do poorly in that kind of a meritocratic system, you only have yourself to blame. So it's a double-edged sword in that case. I think it's overall better for people to live in a meritocracy. It's fairer for sure, and it creates more innovation and progress, but we can't just look at it blindly and say, there's no downsides. With any given circumstance or any big change, there are going to be downsides that happen. This revolution is not going to just affect one small area and one small area, and it's a microcosm. And we're going to see large shifts overall.
So this is interesting. So let's talk about, give an example of the downside, and what is the ethics then that goes with that downside?
So one of the possible downsides is if you don't have people working essentially at all anymore. While Will talked about a circumstance with the Jane Austen novels where people have the ability to read, they have the ability to play music, to enjoy the finer things in life, what about meaningful work? I know personally for me, I always thought the idea of finding a job that was meaningful, that was important, that was impactful, that provided some degree of societal benefit really mattered to me. And I know a lot of other people feel the same way. We can't just like give people poetry and books and say, oh, go read to your heart's content and let it stop there. People should feel like they are contributing to society, that they're making the world a better place. That kind of an idea is extremely beneficial to human psyche. So I'm a little bit tentative when we're talking about, humans no longer need work. No, I think people should work. People are better off when they are working. So this kind of full leisure-based ideology is harmful in my opinion, and this hard work ethic where people are working obscene hours is also harmful. We need to find the right balance between the two things so that people find themselves edified, but still have leisure time and with their family and with their friends.
John, before I get to William, you want to jump in real quick?
Yeah, I just had something very quick to say. I'll keep it short. In Greek and Roman society, it was actually very looked down upon to be a hard worker in a lot of ways. Like the goal of work was leisure, and now it's sort of flipped, which has been good for us in a lot of ways. We have leisure time so that we can recuperate and go back to work. That's just how we've started to look at it, and I'm pretty sure that. Myself and most people I'd know, if they didn't have anything to do, they didn't have any work, they would be a lot less happy for it. But that's not to say that the next generation after AI would think the same.
William.
I think we're going off of two very different assumptions here. So Matthew was saying art isn't really meaningful work. People need meaningful work. I think if you tell that to the 100 or so musicians in the LA Philharmonic, they would be very angry. But so a society needs innovation because innovation is the main thing that drives economic growth and standards of living. So I think when we were preparing for this panel, I was assuming that AIs wouldn't be able to take on the role of innovation, which is why you would still need humans to work to fill a niche in taking on innovation. But I don't know if Matthew is basing his assumption off of whether AIs will take over the role of innovation as well. I don't foresee that. And the second thing is that I just don't see how the rise of AI would suddenly lead to a meritocracy. I just don't see that logic there, because I'm going to go back to my chess game example. If you could have 3 amateur players with a laptop beating Deep Blue and a grandmaster, why would I need to hire the best person for my company if I could just hire my, let's say, cousin, and give him like an AI to assist him, and he will do almost as well or even just as fine as hiring someone who actually knows what they're doing. I just don't see how AI will lead to meritocracy.
Wait a minute, we got to move on. But I want to ask you a question on ethics, because I gave the example about the driverless car who makes the decisions. For those of you that watch Star Trek, you'll remember the Kobayashi Maru scenario is called the no-win scenario, where someone's going to die, and so there was no win. And let's take this concept of ethics for a moment and take it to this Kobayashi Maru for the challenge of the AI car. There's the boy who's running out into the street chasing his ball. There's the passenger in the car. And there's traffic all around. In this situation, somebody's going to get hurt. Let's just assume that we're going to design the Kobayashi Maru experiment where somebody gets hurt. What are the ethical challenges there? Where does ethics come in, or is it just a set of actuarial tables? Let's start with Matthew.
So this is going to, in part, dovetail with the response to Will's last point, because this will include some degree of meritocracy, but I'm also going to talk about utilitarianism and deontology. First off, I apologize for using all these weird philosophy terms, but they do matter in accordance to these ideals. So starting off with the example you're providing, you're saying no matter what, somebody gets hurt.
Let's just assume it.
Let's just assume that's the case. No matter if it's human driving it or if it's a machine driving it, somebody's going to get hurt.
No, when I say someone's going to be a human, a human is going to get hurt. No matter, this scenario's a human's going to get hurt. So now we have an AI car, right? What's the ethics in that car? How do you embed it?
So the ethics are going to sound initially difficult no matter what the circumstance, because in my opinion, if a human was behind the wheel as well, it would be horrible for them too. Nobody should get hurt, but if somebody is going to be hurt, the car has to make some kind of a decision. So I think the decision is going to come down as AI develops more and more to be more of a utilitarian value scheme. Who's least likely to get hurt, who is most likely to survive, who's least likely to sustain permanent injuries. And if we're talking about a circumstance between an AI controlling the car versus a human controlling the car, I would rather have an AI in control which is able to determine the best possible outcome. All outcomes are horrible. Nobody should be hurt. We can all agree on that. But if somebody is going to be hurt, who is the most likely to be okay? I think that outcome with an AI is a better outcome than with a human driver. So when it comes to morality, I think it just devolves down to utilitarian scheme. And that initially unsettles us. We feel kind of horrible about that. Would you want to drive a car that could potentially prioritize your life second or third over somebody else, the guy next to you, the kid in the street? Who is it going to prioritize? But if we look at this as more the deontological viewpoint, the reason why deontology breaks down, especially in circumstances like these, is because people aren't perfect predictors. We're not perfect machines, and we don't know the outcomes of all scenarios. I'm not saying machines do either. I'm not saying machines are omniscient. But I think the machines would have a better chance of protecting human life than a person would.
So, William, let me complicate your life here. Given that we have a utilitarian view of AI in this situation, I'm the passenger, and I just came up. I'm driving home, and I'm feeling good, and you know something? It popped into my head. I just discovered the cure for cancer. And just at that time, the AI machine says, you're number 2 on our list of survivors. How does that figure in, or is it just basic utilitarian doctrine?
Well, I think that, first of all, so you talked about, you equated this scenario with a Kobayashi Maru. So in one of J.J. Abrams' Star Trek movies, Captain Kirk actually hacked this game, and I'm going to do the same thing. So let's say we're in a future where most cars are AIs. So actually, all cars are run by AIs. Of course, the AI is going to make the decision to avoid hitting the boy who runs up to get the ball, because once you have cars, if all cars could react as quickly as an AI, then there's absolutely no chance, and if those AI cars could communicate with each other, as many people have proposed, then there's absolutely no chance that if you're sitting in a car let's say, in order to avoid hitting the boy, and then you're sitting in another car, and then like a truck will hit your car. Because in a society where AIs are driving cars, the chances of mistakes are just pretty much zero, like especially if you're communicating with each other. Let's say you're having talks, cars basically talking to each other. So I just think that an AI will always make the decision that reduces the amount of life loss.
So let me switch a little bit on you here because of time. John, it's over to you. This question is going back to the white-collar workforce. I think there's a kind of a consensus that there's going to be impact on the white-collar workforce, especially for those accountants. They're gone. But for everyone else, there's going to be some impact. So how will the structure of business change? And how will executives continue to be relevant in an AI world?
Yeah, so I think this goes back especially to something that Matthew was talking about earlier about everything becoming a perfect meritocracy. Because once AI is in charge of hiring, then presumably the AI will know the perfect candidates to hire, and it will know where a human is needed and where a machine is needed. Perhaps executives might eventually be the only ones in a company who are actually human. But I think that one very interesting problem that recently has been documented extensively is how unreliable artificial intelligence can be in determining the structure of a company or in the hiring process. For example, AIs that are supposed to be completely objective have been proven not to hire like females as much as males in some cases, and things like that. AIs that are programmed to be entirely objective. And the reason for this, many people think, is because with machine learning, you don't actually program into the code, okay, this is the type of person you should hire. You let the program learn from various inputs of data about who it should hire, and as it turns out, many of the programs start reflecting our own biases and our own flaws. And so it is dangerous to think that an AI will be completely moral, or that the structure of a company will suddenly be perfect and everything will flow just because it's a machine. Machines that are programmed by humans often tend to have the same flaws as humans do.
Matthew?
So I think my greatest contention with that is that it's based on the status quo. He's completely right. With the current system, machines absolutely reflect sometimes what their creators do, because there's a lack of code. They're more learning based on experience. So when he's saying that they're going to reflect, the biases of their creators, he's absolutely right. But I don't think that's the direction of AI in the future. I think AI has steadily been getting better and better and continually more advanced. 20 years ago, would we be having anything like this discussion today? Would we even think we were here today? I don't think so. I think the very concept of machine learning is so important and pivotal that today we have a whole nother discussion about it. We're asking ourselves, is there going to be a massive revolution that's going to create upheaval in every way? And in the status quo, he's right. We don't have a perfect meritocracy. Let's be completely honest. It doesn't exist right now. But I think in the future, it can. And it likely will if machines take true opportunities to optimize. As machines get better, as artificial intelligence gets better, the things that would be subjectively human will start to fall away and create that meritocracy that I'm talking about.
One more quick round of questions, then we're going to turn it over to you, the audience. So we're going to start with John. What is the responsibility of man in an AI society? That is, if we grant more available time without the requirement of labor and with a UBI, as you've espoused, what, if anything, is man required to give back? Or does he just sit around watching video games?
So to be clear, do you mean in a society where you have a UBI and the option to not work, what should man give back?
Well, let's have a society with AI and with UBI. Both. What is the requirement of man?
Well, at that point, it starts to fall down from the requirement of man to his fellow men to just the individual. Because in a society before AI, before like true AI, because we've been talking about AI as if it's one big thing, but there is AI right now, it's just not terribly advanced. And the AI that we're talking about in this question, I think, is AI that could take any job. It could be your psychiatrist if you want. Although that'd be a little bit weird, but.
Well, at least it's not the accountants.
I'm so sorry to the accountants. Because in the current society, we have obligations to support members of our family or members of our community, maybe even members outside of our community. In a society where AI sort of becomes the caretaker, then doesn't it fall to us to find some new way to make our lives meaningful? Perhaps it'll turn out that AI is less creative than us, but I think it'd be a terribly unfortunate future, but perhaps a likely one, if we realize that AI is just better than us in every way.
Jonathan, we have time for audience questions, don't we? All right. So with that, we're going to turn it over to you for a little bit. We have one in the back there, Jonathan.
Thanks. I'd like to applaud all of you for being here. It's very wonderful to see people of your age really thinking about the future to such a great extent. My concern is that in your speeches, you really tended to bring in the political aspect, but at the same time, you probably have never experienced life under the Cold War, under different political systems, in a host of different countries. One of the things, you touched on it slightly in the driverless car aspect of AI, but one of the key concepts of AI is autonomy. And in that means there are people who are not liable for decisions. And part of the basis of any government in any country is a system of laws. And when you start talking about systems who can enact things on their own, where nobody is particularly liable, you start getting into very fine lines of different government ideologies. You start skirting the edges of law. And I'm wondering if any of you have done any looking at aspect of AI from that aspect of autonomy and who is liable when nobody's liable, and how does that affect a political system? Great question. Let's go down the row here. Matthew, you're up.
So first off, that's an extremely important question, especially as we're talking about the growth of AI in terms of morality that we don't really fully understand at this point. There's been two kind of presented ideas. One of them is that it would reflect whatever the human would do. So in the driverless car scenario, the car would just do exactly what the driver would do. And in most cases, the driver would try to protect themselves in most circumstances. And that's one presented idea, that we shouldn't try to mess with morality, we shouldn't try to get involved in this, we should just make it mimic what the human does. And then the other one is that utilitarian one that I was talking about, where it chooses the best possible circumstance that causes the least amount of harm. And I think in going forward, when you're talking about government policies in terms of responsibility, in terms of acquisition of law, I think we're all going to run into this point where we realize there's great insufficiencies with how we understand ourselves as sentient beings and others. So if the AI, if we respect it as a sentient being and go into responsibility and all that other stuff that follows along in really treating AI as like a thinking entity, there is going to be a plethora, a truly massive amount of evidence that we're going to have to look into before we try to answer questions like this.
So, William, liability, free choice, government, representative government, how does that all come into play?
Well, I think if we're going to start talking about AI as sentient, then we're getting into much more difficult realms. But I think an AI is going to be created by a company. And when let's say your children are playing with toys that have been coated with lead paint, who do you sue? The company that made that toy. So if an AI makes a mistake, you sue the company, and that incentivizes the company to make a better product next time. So I think it just reinforces itself. So after a lot of processes, you'll get a much better product.
Sure.
Yeah, but I think the problem, though, is that in certain situations, such as the one with the car, it's somewhat morally ambiguous what should happen. Even if we say that we should make a utilitarian system, then you need to come to some agreement about certain basic values. For example, if the person in the car is about to cure cancer, but by saving him you kill a child, I mean, how do you really tell which one of those two is morally right? But at the same time, it's very dangerous to hand that authority over to anyone, to the government or to a corporation or to an individual, to decide what is moral and what isn't moral. And I think that in that situation, you're very right. Like, none of us have enough experience to really answer that fully, and I don't know if anyone does or if it's just going to need to emerge over time, because it's almost as if we could design the perfect person, how could we ever agree on what their morals should be?
I just had a suggestion or a question for the scholars up there. What if you took the universal basic income and channeled it into job retraining and social benefits? Wouldn't that be a way of compensating for the damage of AI?
John, we're going to start with you.
Yeah, so one thing that I've been thinking about is, let's imagine that there's someone who's 40 years old, an accountant, at the...
Wait a minute, wait. 40 years old is old now? Is that it? What happened?
40 years young.
Thank you.
Someone who has lived for 40 years, who is an accountant at the real dawn of AI, and by the time he's 45, AI has completely overtaken accounting, and he doesn't really have a job anymore. Now, at that point, of course, it's still completely feasible for him to be retrained in another career, but I think that in a lot of ways it's somewhat cruel to demand that a very large segment of the population, because almost everyone agrees it would be a huge amount of the population that would be out of work, would retrain for an entirely different career halfway through their lives. And so I think that for that segment of the population, like, there's going to be a 20-year or so transition period after AI where people have already been trained for careers that are no longer really needed, and it's not, I mean, it's feasible, but it's not optimal to retrain for a different career. And I think that for those people, there should be the option to retrain for a different career, but there should also be the option for universal basic income.
So William, retrain for a specific career, not an option for a specific career. UBI is a way for retraining. Where do you weigh in on this?
I actually disagree that many people are going to be jobless after AI. We don't have time to really discuss it, but like if we do, I could get into economics behind it. But let's say, let's assume again that a lot of people do get out of jobs. I think putting it into a job retraining program makes total economic sense, because right now, even in the modern conventional society, you have frictional unemployment and you have steady state unemployment, where in order for the government to reduce steady state unemployment, you want more people finding jobs. So to do so, you have job retraining programs. And I think it is totally feasible for people to just retrain. I think that if you're letting them just choose the option of UBI, it's one more person, one less worker in the economy. And you know what happens when you have one less worker in the economy? When you have inputs, capital, labor, and technical progress, you have one less input into the labor section, and that actually decreases our GDP.
So Matthew, is UBI a transitory help, or is it a subsidy where when you subsidize something, you get more of it? So if you have nothing, do you get more nothing?
So real quick question, how comfortable does everybody feel with just giving somebody a blank check indefinitely? I mean, I don't feel too great about that either, and I am currently a college student who is looking at potentially getting one of those blank checks in about 2 years when I graduate, because I have no faith in myself. Sorry, besides that, when we're looking at this kind of a system, I think what you're talking about, if that was presented for UBI, I would completely support it. Because if we are actively retraining people, trying to make them better, trying to bring them back into society, trying to bring them into an interactive community, that is an optimal scenario. We want people working, we want people healthy, we want people active, we want them producing. We want that kind of a society, and I think that's an optimal circumstance. If that was UBI, where sure, people, if they don't have a job, we're not saying we're not going to give you any money at all, you're on your own, starve if you want. That's horrible, and we're not supporting that at all. But what we are saying is you can't not work forever. We want to get you back into the field. We want to make you productive. We want to make it so you can go home at night and feel proud of yourself because you've done a good day's work. You have survived and you have flourished. And I think that's kind of the circumstance with the UBI. We've seen what you're talking about already with coal miners. That was kind of the presented plan by the current administration, not so much, but there is kind of this idea that if we train people in other tasks and help them move away from what was harmful to them in the first place, either a dead-end job or harmful to their health, that's a better scenario, and that's a better way of spending our money.
Next question.
We have a question from Facebook, Joe Lucasti from Tennessee. There's a consideration to tax the replacement costs of robotics which replaced workers. The real problem is we are a consumer-based society, so how will the distribution of wealth accommodate that physical loss?
Can you repeat the question again? Sorry.
Sure. There's a consideration to tax the replacement costs of robotics which replaced workers. The real problem is we are a consumer-based society, so how will the distribution of wealth accommodate that physical loss?
Okay, so yeah, so of course we're a consumer-based society, and one economic theory by Keynes says that demand drives output. So if you have a lot of people demanding goods, then output goes up because companies are saying we have so much demand, we can make money by selling products. Another theory is that output drives demand, so that's the classical model of economics. So what I think is that when you have robotics replacing everyone, and let's say that there's no universal basic income, let's just assume that, and you have a lot of jobless people, then they're not going to be buying stuff. You have no demand, and you're going to have output reduced, and it's just going to be a vicious cycle.
Me?
John, please.
All right. So I'm by no means the expert on this because I'm not an econ student, but the way I interpreted the question, he was saying that, so since we're a consumer-based economy, we have less people who would be replaced by robotics, so there'd be less opportunity for taxation. But the interesting thing about AI is that it will actually much more easily at the beginning, sorry if this is echoing, it'll much more easily at the beginning replace white-collar quantitative labor than it will replace blue-collar labor. And we have a lot of white-collar labor in the United States. The reason for this is because it's much harder to train a computer and to train a robot to do physical labor than it is to do mathematics. And so I think that in that way, actually, because we're a consumer-based, largely white-collar economy, then it will work much better. I disagree with the tax, though.
Matthew?
I think there's a few ideas going on here, but what I really want to capitalize on is this idea of instituting a tax on a company, which for innovating and moving to robotics, and I think that's inherently detrimental as far as an idea, largely because when you're talking about putting a tax on a company for innovating, for robotics, for progressing in that sense, you are disincentivizing them from encouraging robotic growth and expenditures. And in the short term, it's very painful for people to lose their jobs. Like my dad was out of work for about 3 years. I get it. It is beyond painful. If we're retraining people, it'll be less painful. But it still doesn't mean it doesn't hurt, and doesn't mean there's not going to be a lot of people who are displaced. But to try to hold companies back from what's likely going to be an inevitable shift at some point or another, I don't think that's a solution. That's a Band-Aid for a problem that's we're going to run into it in another 5 to 10 years if we try to institute this kind of a tax on companies. So I'd just be wary of trying to prolong the inevitable versus fixing the problems directly and head on.
I think we have one more question.
With regard to Matthew's comment previously about AI being able to, like, let's say, do hiring in a neutral manner without any kind of human bias, I can't even wrap my head around, I'm trying to hire a teacher, I need them to be good at teaching, good at disciplining, dealing with parents, administration, bureaucracy. I have to prioritize that. There's no way for me to say one is not as important or the other are more important. A human has to be involved. And the second you involve a human, then you're going to have political bias. Well, what's more important? How does somebody make a neutral decision? Somebody had to input what the decision factors are.
Great question. Excellent question. Gents, just this is a lightning round. We're going to go right down the...
Okay. So
Matthew, go.
I'm going to talk a little bit quickly because we don't have much time here. But in responding to your question, I think the important thing to take away from this is what Will was talking about beforehand, is right now we have nowhere near that kind of capabilities. What you're talking about, to take all that into account, would take a much stronger AI that we have available. Like, you can't imagine it right now. To be honest, I can't imagine that either. I've seen the direction that AI has moved. I've seen the progress that has been almost unthinkable even up to this point. So I'm saying that's not entirely unlikely, and that's a very plausible outcome. That being said, in the current system, we don't have a perfect meritocracy, and we probably won't for some time. But if we do get to that point where AI is actually able to make those decisions, where they're able to make all those valuations, where they're able to take into account every variable that you just mentioned and more, I think we're looking at a circumstance where that's moving more into the meritocratic view.
William, 15 seconds.
I think that is why you shouldn't worry about your jobs. Humans will always compliments for AIs. You're going to have a lot more productivity, and everything's going to be great.
John?
So actually, I think that's much closer than Matthew is predicting. There are actually already companies that are specializing in AI looking for jobs or doing job searching. Because AI is able to figure out things about you that you never actually told it. By scanning through a bunch of Facebook posts, even if you never...
Sorry, I know that that's been a big issue recently, so I looked at Facebook to see when it sent my political standings, so you saw how the information
So that is a big issue because people are already starting to rely on it as if it's correct. There's a certain air about AI and computers and science in general that if you have numbers to back it up, then it must be correct. And so that's obviously a very big issue. Just a quick anecdote, there was a program that was trained to detect the difference between huskies and wolves. And it was doing fantastically, getting great results, and then they realized that it was just checking to see if there was snow on the ground in the photo. And that's the sort of thing that is dangerous with machine learning because you can't really quantify whether it's correct or not. Some people just have faith that it is.
So in bringing this to a close, where will AI take us 20 years henceforth? As for me, I ponder, if AI can free mankind from labor, then will philosophers, priests, and physicists gather to contemplate the mind of the Creator? Will standing armies be replaced with poets who battle to express the beauty of nature, and victory is the sound of unbridled imagination? Will our mental resources be brought to bear to the enlightenment of art and science and the wondrous knowledge we would gain? Will we replace petty politics with the pursuit of wisdom and virtue? These are the things that dreams are made of. Before I bring up Jonathan to close this, let me give my thanks to the Richard Nixon Foundation, who's graciously hosted us in this beautiful facility. Our panel of students who have given us reason, thought, and hope for the future. Thank you, gentlemen. And to our Collegiate Forum team of Jonathan Mavroidis, Megan Zwirling of U.S. Vigilance, and David Brown, who's our student participant who did a great job in rounding up all these fine young men over here. And, of course, couldn't have done it without you. You're the best. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you for these gentlemen for a very insightful conversation. Please check back at nixonfoundation.org for future events, and we'll see you next time. Thank you so much.